The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What's happening, Benton here? A bit of an unplanned live stream, although I suppose that applies to most of them. Shout out to the replay crew. Shout out to the live chat. Uh, Maybe a few folks will file in. Had some ideas and some thoughts, as always. This one probably won't be too long, but who knows? Who knows? Yeah, it's been interesting. It's been interesting. So Google has announced that the Google Pixel 6a smartphone that I use uh, has a battery problem where the batteries can become too hot and explode. So they've offered support options, which are a $150 credit to the Google Play Store. Is it the Play Store? Well, shit, maybe I should have taken that. No, I believe it's the Google Store where you buy phones. Yeah, it's not the Google Play. $100 cash, they say, in air quotes cash, but they call it cash. Or I could have the battery replaced at a authorized service center. Um, so what they're going to do is, I think tomorrow they're going to force an update that's going to drastically reduce the battery life, the battery capacity to prevent the handsets from exploding. And the battery's already been a challenge. The battery life, I'm already charging, like multiple times a day. And so I had ordered a Motorola phone, a lesser expensive phone. Well, actually, this is not an expensive phone either. I should say less expensive than the Motorola I was going to buy. Just can't quite bring myself to buy a $400 phone, even though when I had first planned on buying it, I had plenty of money. So something, there was a couple of times I know I would have pulled the trigger, and they were out. They were out of stock temporarily. So I suppose it's worked out this way. What's up, Joe Moore? Peace to you, sir. And yeah, I'm not sure how many people will want to listen to me ramble about phones, but I need to get this off my chest, so please bear with me. And it will certainly. I'll get into the state of the dystopia. So I have a with a case and tax. I think I paid like $230. It's sitting in an Amazon locker because if I don't pick it up from the locker, then like after 3 days they'll pick it up and eventually I'll get a refund. So I haven't quite decided. And tomorrow's Prime Day, although they probably won't have a deal on a phone. Uh, and also, I have to have a phone that works on US Mobile with eSIM since I'm not able to. I have no way to receive a physical SIM card through the mail. Although I look back at it and I certainly could have. That may have been the move in the past. I'm not a big second guesser, but perhaps I could have spent like a month in a motel and ordered everything I could ever need that would be shipped via the mail. In fact, US Mobile initially would offered a Google Pixel 9, the latest version, for $400, like half off, but I didn't have anywhere to have it mailed to, right? And then now they've dropped it to $250, and I'm like, yeah, that would be great. Of course, it'll probably have the exploding battery problem. I mean, who knows? But As far as the recent true knowledge of self, right, that I've been talking about so much, um, and then the Fight Club idea from the movie Fight Club of to let that which does not matter truly slide. I'm having trouble finding the motivation for a lot of this stuff, such as I've already spent close to an hour navigating the various screens and websites to try to get this $100 from Google. Of course, first I did my research. I'm not a Reddit user, but a lot of times when one Googles something, a Reddit thread will pop up. So, you know, a few Redditors claim to have received this $100. So I'm like, fuck it, might as well. But in the back of my mind, it's like, and it's not a defeatist attitude. It's not a manifestation, right? That's not what manifesting is. In the back of my mind, I'm like, yeah, surely this isn't going to work. But cautiously optimistic. Now, I might have screwed the thing up by using my regular email. I think I was probably supposed to use my Google email, my Gmail, and then I guess because they already know scammers are going to be trying to steal this $100, like all new levels of prove you're not a robot verification, right? Like I'm arguably somewhat intelligent, and I even had trouble initially. Like, what is it they want me to do here? It's the longest, like, most confusing and involved CAPTCHA I've ever seen, you know. And then, so we got Google, we got the Google site trying to talk to this third party Payoneer. They're going to do the payments through Payoneer, whatever that is, right? And then at a certain point, even as someone who's going to run out of money quite soon, I'm looking at this process I'm forcing myself through, thinking like, is this even worth $100? I mean, honestly, is it even worth $100? Meanwhile, I bought the phone, I think like May of last year. Like, I got my use out of it. Like, yeah, I'd like the $100, but at a certain point, what are all of these hoops? And then with the true knowledge of self I've talked about recently, and all of my practices. So I'm watching my emotional and physiological reactions in real time to attempting to navigate all of this nonsense. And then of course, the first time I click to be directed to the Payoneer site to make the account, that's when I've got the bona fides from Google, right? Presumably Payoneer knows who I am. They know, okay, this is not one of our regular customers. This is one of those people that's getting that $100 from Google. And of course the fucking thing, it just times out and freezes, right? Of course I was not yet aware of the extensive CAPTCHA. So I think what happened was it just sat on a screen like, please wait, and it's loading. It's trying to load, this series of 10 different fucking brain teaser puzzles I have to navigate to prove I'm a human, right? But I don't know that that's what's going to happen yet. So it didn't say, hey, sit here for 10 minutes. Don't leave the screen, right? Don't let your, your device lock itself. And as we know, in this nightmare dystopian beast system, it's halfway designed that way. It's like, yeah, we're gonna put out a good faith effort to get these $100 to these people, but and I'm certain if I was willing to devote hour after hour after hour of my life, I'm certain I eventually could get the $100. But as we know, now you have a minimum. It's probably more than two corporations, but you've got a minimum of two corporations involved in. Their only incentive is, how do we avoid giving this guy his $100? Meanwhile, what's Google's motivation for providing these support options? Well, their own reputation, and then, whatever class action lawsuits could result. I mean, I'm sure for Google, they're like, hey, it's just easier to take care of this. Meanwhile, if the battery life in the best of circumstances was acceptable, I would just go, you know, get the battery replaced. And that seemed to be the option that would actually probably work. It seemed just, using my intuition and my IT experience and my technology experience, That seemed to be the option that would work. Now they say, well, why not just go ahead and have the battery replaced? Well, Google in the fine print or whatever, it says once you choose the cash option, the other options are now off the table, right? So like, what sort of devil's bargain even is this? You know, and then, and I understand, I used to have the thoughts. I can remember the thoughts of earlier versions of Benton, which is like, mad that things are this way, and then, how dare they, and then some version of, taking it personally, and um, you know all of the all of the cycles that the individual goes through, and now I'm just sitting there like, yeah, of course they're not going to, of course this is on purpose bad, of course it is. How could it not be? But just sort of watching my own, and not attached to the outcome. Silly little me gets attached to outcomes. It's hilarious, the things that bother us, or I shouldn't say us, that bother me. And it's attachment to outcome, right? And yeah, I understand it's Buddhist 101 to some extent, and that's fine, but Buddhism 101. But like the other day, I wanted a $20 bill specifically, so I did $20 cash back at this grocery store, but I forgot, because I'm up so early, old man up early in the morning. I forgot they just opened like 20 minutes before. Oh, they don't have any 20, there's no $20 bill, and that bothers me for some reason. And now I'm, uncharacteristically getting cranky at the cashier. And then I'm like, well, wait a minute, why am I cranky with the cashier? Oh, that's right. I'm weaning myself off of coffee, and I haven't had any coffee today. And then it's like, well, why the hell does caffeine have such a strong, why does that have such a strong influence on my behavior? Why do I care about the fact that I'm have two $10 bills instead of a $20? Like, who even cares, right? Well, clearly, just temporarily forgot myself, and became too attached to this notion of, well, I'm going to walk out with a $20 bill. And in fact, I would have preferred not to have done the cash back at all if I was going to get two tens. And then now it's too late. There's no way to reverse this. Even if there is, it's not worth trying to go through the rigmarole. And then, just looking at myself as a human or a spirit, or, you know, again, what I know to be my own true nature and all of these things. Like, is it even worth it? Like, at a certain point, this world, this daily life, this existence, you know, now it's worth it in that, I'm able to make it worth it, right? What I am one with, the most super intelligent power and force of love and creation at the highest levels of vibrational frequency, a quickening spirit. Yeah, that's always worth it, that part. But then again, you know, uh, apparently that's what I always am, you know, uh, eternally, one with an indivisible force or spirit. And, it can become a little confusing. What's the point? Um, but I know what the point is. The point is, it's not society intending to create a world or a daily experience for its citizens that's enjoyable and easily navigable. If that's a word, yeah, navigable, navigatable. I think it's navigable. And to provide an experience, but then that's clearly not the point. But then the marketing and the advertising is set up to, in a way, lead the individual to believe, well, yeah, that is what this place is, especially America. Like, this is, if a person works hard and makes the right choices, and serves climbs the corporate ladder and has a high enough income, that the system will serve them, right? No, absolutely not. The system will annoy us. And then that's where, some of the progress over 15 years, the spiritual, the mind, body, and spirit progress. Most of that I'm now seeing as that's all a cope in a way because, yeah, it's to get through my day while being attacked from all directions by various dysfunctional systems of man, you know. Um, and as every day goes by, there are more and more of these systems, and they become more and more complex. And then now more of them are trying to interact with each other. You know, um, at what point does the individual say, "Fuck it, I've had enough"? You know, but not in a Kirk Douglas in the movie Falling Down, not in a, now I'm angry. Now vengeance is mine and I must get revenge and I must take out my emotions. The 15 years, up until the recent true knowledge of self, that's what allowed me to grow and develop, to be able to tolerate, my own negative emotions, my own, undiagnosed fake autism, to finally unlock the achievement of true knowledge of self. So now that actually I'm experiencing way less anxiety, stress, annoyance, irritation going through this process, but I actually have less desire to go through the process, if that makes any sense. So, and that probably comes back again to a Buddhism 101 idea of attachment, creating suffering. Um, yeah, absolutely. Because in the past, I certainly would have just been so determined and so incensed, and yeah, I would have been cursing and angry, all the while spending, however many uh, hours of my life and untold amounts of aggravation, just to get $100. And then again, like I've talked about, Google and this Payoneer company and whoever else, they all know. Well, the incentive here is to make it appear that Benton's $100 is there for the taking. How silly of him not to, navigate a few easy screens, right? Because that's how, from the corporation's perspective, like this is all, it's easy peasy, no problem, and it works perfectly every time, right? I mean, that's how it's going to be portrayed, and that is the hellscape that I find myself in, and the royal we find ourselves in, and again, back to the undiagnosed fake autism, it bothers me arguably more than the average person, perhaps. But so of late, very little bothers me. And I told that little story about, that I temporarily became annoyed um, over the cash back deal at the grocery store. But then pretty quickly, I was able to suss out, well, what's wrong here? Something's wrong if I'm having this strong of a reaction. And, for some reason, I was just really, I guess I was just really fired up about this notion of getting a $20 bill. And some of that is just sort of an OCD thing. I had like a specific amount of money. It was all in 20s. It ultimately doesn't make a fucking difference. Um, so I'd spent a $20 bill and I thought to myself, okay, well, just I'll get cash back at some point in the future and I'll put this, if that represents a temporary savings or whatever, I'll put it back right in the future. So I guess that's what I was attached to, which is a nonsense, nothing idea in the first place, clearly. Um, yeah, it's definitely interesting, observing all of this, especially with a little bit more of a removed perspective where at this point, I've actually switched from in the past, those few moments, and this was more like years and years ago, that the few moments in my life of actual just calm and peace and, oh, everything's copacetic, that was the part that stood out, right? Because the more normal state for me was, agitation, fight or flight, irritable, everything was bothering me. So now it's more or less flipped to where I'm calm, cool, collected, at peace, you know, the vast majority of the time. So then when I do become, you know, anxious or fearful or agitated or irritated, um, then that sticks out. And then the anger thing I'm realizing is it's just whatever little bits left over. When I do actually get angry, almost that's almost always just some of the repressed stuff from the past, seeking its escape. So yeah, other than walking around in deep thinking, walking around deep in thought, and then speaking with you fine folks from time to time, and uh, continuing with whatever practices are left. I mean, what else is there? And I ask rhetorically, um, and I do. It does seem to me like, as much as there's the toxic positivity and the constant bright siding of everything on the part of society, it seems like that pendulum has swung back a little bit to where, folks, and I guess a lot of this occurs on TikTok, especially with the younger folks, but it does seem like people are a little more willing to complain in a way, uh, but still not, fully venting their frustrations. And I get it. Um, not that many people want to listen to someone who's, in an agitated, um, emotional state. And I realize now that in the past, it did not really bother me to listen to certain types of content or someone speaking, who's in a certain negative emotional state. It's probably because I was in those negative states. So now that that's no longer the case, I'm finding sometimes, um, it's so jarring listening to certain content, especially if it sneaks up on me, something disturbing or just maybe some kind of interrogation video, but then they play some sort of disturbing 911 call where somebody has like a high level of emotion, and I'm realizing like, wow, this did not really used to, was neither here nor there for me in the past. And now it's like, man, I can't even listen to this because I don't want to sit here and do fucking the breathing exercises of a monk, right? Just to be able to listen to some YouTube content. And then also the running out of money. It's also like it shows me what's really important. And it's sad, this sad as this is going to sound, YouTube Premium is very high on the list because I don't know, probably 9 more months of cell phone coverage that I've prepaid for, whatever that is. And whether or not I end up taking this new phone or not, um, my device that has the battery problem still, technically works, but it's like, yeah, what do I do when I'm not going to be able to deal with these YouTube ads, right? Well, and actually, it's the background play also, between not being able to turn the screen off to listen to content, and I understand there's ways around the ads on the phone, and there's ways around turning the screen off, but what I found is it's always through using apps. And these apps always work through some form of hacking to where it's always like YouTube is constantly trying to make changes to their technology that will make the app not work, right? The third party app that's involved in letting me more or less have the functionality of YouTube Premium without having to pay for it. So yeah, I understand that with the apps, it is possible to accomplish all of this, but it's still at some point I'm going to want to listen to some content. And it's like, oh, okay, well my app's broken again. My third party app doesn't work, and I now have to wait for hackers to figure out a way around. Easier to just pay the $17 or whatever it is, you know. Um, but then now it's like, okay, what level of serving a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions in order to make the $17 every month, right? Um, and in the past we've had donations around here, and that's cool. But at a certain point, I don't even know that I'm interested in that side of things, honestly. Um, I've sort of lost my desire to even concern myself with the quality of the discourse in some ways. Now, yesterday I thought went pretty well. Sometimes I have a little bit of a head of steam and all of that, but as far as streaming enough to get enough donations to pay for YouTube Premium and StreamYard, I'm not sure I can even be bothered to put in that level of effort. Oh, but remember, it's laziness, right? Uh, and I actually gave and I'm a little disappointed in myself. If I do realize I have my digital audio recorder in the car here. I should or could have recorded this, but I did some public speaking yesterday, and a big part of the public speaking yesterday morning was having to do with um, well, I've forgotten now. See, the setup went too long, and now I've forgotten what I was talking about. Motherfucker. Something about effort. Oh, laziness. This idea that, and really what it is, it's just it's left unspoken. But this whole thing about America and American identity being so wrapped up in hard work. The reality is that nobody in all of human history has ever hard worked themselves into riches. Now, certainly some people, if you think about one of my favorite movies, There Will Be Blood, and Daniel Day-Lewis, yeah, in the very beginning of the movie, he's shown, uh, working his ass off, mining gold in the gold rush, and then he's so determined at a certain point breaks his leg and has to drag himself up out of the mine and drag himself back to town and all of this, which I'm assuming that's some symbol of hard work or showing what hard work is. But that was just to get enough money to then go into the speculative risk taking side of things. So for all we know, Daniel Day Lewis has done various in the movies, done various quick get rich quick schemes, because that's what that would be. The gold rush, that's not a hey, we're gonna go work our asses off and get rich. No, the gold rush was it's people taking a risk just to physically get to the area to strike it rich. That was a get rich quick scheme. That wasn't a we're going to work hard, live below our means, and scrimp and save. You know, but it's portrayed as if hard work is how these people become wealthy. It's not. Not one single person in all of human history has hard worked themselves to riches, because, like I say in the movie There Will Be Blood, the hard work part was just to get up just enough of a stake to then go gamble speculatively in whatever markets there are, and then, you know, uh, defeating the competition. Now, this was a long fucking time ago. Also, the current climate is much different. Amazon did not outcompete its way to the top, via a meritocracy, right? But again, this is a movie. This is how the oil barons and all of this were portrayed in the movie. Based on, I guess, Upton Sinclair's Oil, I think, is what the movie's loosely based on, I believe. Um, so really, what's being implied is that poor people are poor because they're lazy. And I said, well, there's nobody lazier than people born into actual wealth, and I mean actual wealth. Not the people we might think of, in our local areas, or people we may think of as rich. I'm talking about actual rich people. Um, uh, because they have the greatest opportunity to practice laziness. They're born into a situation where, other than what their family forces them to do, they don't have to lift a finger. There's nothing that they are compelled to do, economically, or out of practical matters. Maybe keeping up appearances, being accepted by the other wealthy folks, yeah, whatever all of that rigmarole is. But outside of that, a rich person or an actual wealthy person, that's the laziest people. That's the people who do the least. Those are the people who provide this idea of well, you don't want to be a burden on society. That's the biggest burden and drain on society is wealthy people. Oh, well, and this idea of job creation. Well, wait a minute, but doesn't quality of job come into it? Because if we're looking at job creation as if that's a contributor to the so-called economy, then, well, if I look at the quality of the jobs being created over time, so even if I accept the system's premise that that's, a some sort of noble undertaking, oh, we're job creators, right? This thing that, you know, the so-called conservatives like to crow about, and even somebody like Adam Carolla has been talking about for years, this idea of so-called job creation. So even if I accept the premise that, okay, that's somehow a contribution, well, what about what quality of jobs are being created, right? Like, is that really something to brag about? And beyond, the job creation aspects, okay, well, what else you got, right? When we try to just say, well, they have to be contributing to society because, and it's also based on the idea that it's a fair system and a free market economics and a meritocracy, because it's like, well, the fact that these individuals or groups have managed to accrue so much wealth, well, that has to be proof that they are contributing and serving society, because, you know, the mind control is basically that society has to be mostly good, mostly functional, right? Mostly a meritocracy, mostly fair, mostly equitable, mostly free market economics. Well, it's none of those things. So that's a false premise. So, of course, the mind control says that the wealthy fat cats, well, they actually contribute the most to society. And I'm saying, no, they contribute the least and they take the most. So when we look at what's going on with the Social Security Administration, your average mind controlled American thinks it's awesome, right? Especially, again, the more conservative types, they think it's great that, apparently Social Security is getting rid of like 18, they're going to get rid of up to like 18 million people that have been getting monthly checks. Now, people who don't know much of anything about Social Security, the Social Security Administration, they assume that means retired people. So it's kind of confusing. Like, well, what do you mean? Well, there's all kinds of people on SSDI, which I believe is Social Security Disability Insurance, or just SSI, which is Social Security Insurance. And I'm not quite sure the difference there. Um, and, some people, a lot of these folks, it's the so called crazy checks, right? And, you know, there's been, it becomes like a multi generational thing where people in certain areas figure out, okay, this is a way to get money from the government. So you have a lot of people who say, okay, that's great. We don't want to see idea of the so-called welfare queen. And oh, well, and it's really jealousy in my view, but, you know, I'm out here busting my ass and they're getting everything for free. Yeah, but at least those are human beings and they're closer, they're in the same class you are, right? You're both poor folks. It's actually class warfare, because the the conservative who has no problem taking that welfare queen stance and is actually going to be happy when individual humans are no longer getting money from the government, right? And people have already been cut off. And I'm not even saying they shouldn't be cut off. I want you to understand the point I'm making. That's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is absolutely cut them off, but not a moment before you cut the banks off and the corporations off. Because the wealthy people, the rich people, the people with power and money, they're taking way more power. I'm sorry, they're taking way more taxpayer money than the so-called welfare queens. Yeah, there are people sponging, there's individual humans sponging off of the system, debatably. Sure, there are. And that's a drop in the bucket compared to what the wealthy people and the corporations and the banks and the financial institutions are siphoning off. It's a drop in the bucket. So why in to me it shows the mind control, because how can the same individual be incensed and angry when individual humans are siphoning off the government, but has absolutely no problem with a large, powerful institution or large, powerful, wealthy families siphoning off of the government. Oh, no problem. That's completely fine. So it's the like hypocrisy, built into it, because the fact is, if the people or the government, which is not possible, by the way, and this is just a thought experiment. None of what I'm speaking on is even possible. And I need to be careful here. I'm annoying myself. More repression seeking in the exit, perhaps. I don't know. Hard to say. Um, so my argument hinges entirely on the fact that rich banks and just rich people in general are siphoning way more money from the system and the taxpayer than the so-called welfare queens ever could. So if if the banks and the corporations and the rich folks are cut off, right, which is impossible, that can't happen. But if they were cut off from siphoning and sponging off the taxpayer, now I have no argument. So now people are like, hey, we got to get rid of all these so-called welfare queens. Okay, now I have no defense. My only thing I'm saying is, yeah, absolutely cut them off, but not a moment before you cut off the wealthy and the powerful. But here's the thing: is the government speaks only the language of power and money. So the people who have the power, the institutions that have the power and the money, the families that have the power and the money, they're the ones who get to tell the government, "Hey, it's time to cut off these. It's time to cut the commoners off." Now, why is this the time in which the commoners are being cut off? Because the timing suits the system itself, right? And back to Kaczynskiism, this is what suits the system. Now, what we see is economically, this America, it's now getting to where it's having a great deal of difficulty financing itself, you know, um, even more so than in the past, just to be able to operate, in the global financial system. And that's where the, 1.15 trillion, which apparently last year I heard represented 23% of total government revenue from all sources. 23% went to banks. So this is what I mean. For interest on the debt, that's just to service the debt. It's basically like credit card interest payments. This is what I'm saying. Whatever the welfare queens are taking is nowhere near 23% of the entire amount of money that the government takes in. Like it's laughably small in comparison. So who cares if some po folks get some food stamps and some Section 8 and some SSI or some SSDI? Like seriously, who cares when the banks are taking 1.15 trillion and that's just through one form? Never mind the taxation involved in inflation, which is a tax. And you know, and you're going to be hearing people talk about a lot of this. I'm starting to hear some of these ideas. I've known about this for a long time. I'm not parroting something I just recently heard. Um, and I do have an interest in how the financial system operates. But back to the true knowledge of self, and I'm seeing now that in a lot of ways, probably my life has to be this way. As we move, I'll be 50 this summer, and however many years remaining. Apparently, more years than, again, not promised tomorrow, but barring the unforeseen, probably going to live more years than I would have anticipated, even 4 to 3 to 4 to 5 years ago with my chronic illnesses. And then, you know, how is the individual, expected to reconcile these ideas that I'm talking about? Well, they're not. And then, so back to the mind control and back to the psychological attacks. And then what did I call this stream? the spiritual side. So the spiritual side of all of this is to constantly be spiritually attacked, through these systems of man, right? So much so that the person is spending so much of their efforts and so much of their energy, so much of their focus and so much of their concentration, locked into these battles, right? Um, locked into these battles with a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. And how much of that precludes them from developing spiritually. And then when we combine that with the mind, body, and the spirit, um, and part of the speech I delivered yesterday morning was about, you know, my own development as a free thinker and ability to use logic and reason, and then seeing that it more or less. And when I tried really hard as a younger person, into my 30s, I tried really hard to conform to society through employment and all of this and living like other folks. And it was never, some people just no matter what are never going to be able to fully conform to society. I was able to do it to some extent. In the long run, it wasn't possible for me. But then some of that comes into destiny or fate or, what my actual path is in this life. But so certainly in the current iteration, you know, my own practices, my own harnessing the power of my mind, teaching myself logic and reason, critical thinking, deductive reason, all of these things, the end result, well, one of the results is now we have a person who, you know, practically speaking is unable to conform to society. So much so that, I wouldn't even attempt it. Now, when I can pass a drug test at some point in the future, yeah, I might be perhaps cajoled into going back to truck driving. Yeah, that's always a possibility, right up until it isn't, you know. Um, but even that, I don't think would be. And I already see the writing on the wall with truck driving, where we're already there to some extent, but more and more long haul trucking is going to be people who are mostly attracted to the big rig as a living space, and then the fact that, yeah, the amount of money being paid for the job being done is certainly not adequate, but then at least the person knows they'll have some form of shelter and they will be able to eat, right? um, especially if the economic situation, continues to go in the direction it's going, you know. And really, what's inflated the inflation? It's lifestyle creep. It's lifestyle inflation. When I look back at, the 1965 to 1983, that's the period known by the Federal Reserve as the Great Inflation. Here's the thing, though: there was way less stuff to buy back then. People were way less sophisticated in their worship of the national religion of consumerism, right? Um, And I would say that that's now American society has progressed, although, yeah, I don't believe it to represent a progression, but there's been too much progress made on the just too many products, too many services, marketing and advertising being so, you know, conjoined with how individuals view themselves, and then also tied into how they're able to pass themselves off on the internet, as a certain type of person. Um, you know, when I was 20, when I was in my early 20s, I don't remember anybody my age I don't remember hearing anybody talking about going on vacation. And then now with other than, oh, my family's going on vacation, so it's just, oh, it's summer, so I'm not me, but maybe some girl that I knew was like, oh, this summer me and my family are going on vacation, and she's 19 or whatever, so she's going on the family vacation, even though she's an adult or whatever. You know, I don't mean that. I mean like a 23-year-old, using credit cards and then going to Europe or whatever. I mean, I'm talking about going on an actual trip with the gal pals or the, whatever, going to a vacation. And as we know, that's mostly for social media. Um, so just those aspects of being social media affording the opportunity to put out a certain image to the world, just that alone is a big damn deal, I would say. And look at how much it's changed people's behavior within the context of mind control. And then, as I've noted in the past, almost all humans, well, I should say Americans, but almost all Americans that I see, a sizable percentage, they observe what everybody else is doing and they do what everybody else is doing, no matter what that is. So if the other folks on social media, the other 24-year-olds are, you know, going on vacations and then posting that on their various social media, that's what they're going to do. It's just how this works. And so I'm only bringing up vacations to point out that there's way more venues for spending money, than there was in the 90s, right? Uh, in the 90s, my thing, and again, this is what people forget because 2025 is the golden age of affordable consumer electronics. Well, what I was into in the 90s, among other things, computer nerd, but even before the computer nerd side of things, it was electronics in general, but like home stereo and then like the beginning stages of home theater, right? That's what I was into at the time. And, you know, it was almost inaccessible from a monetary standpoint because with inflation, right, the cost of the electronics was so high. And eventually I did end up with a pretty decent home theater system in the 90s. Surprise, surprise, I bought most of it with consumer credit. So I didn't actually buy it at all. They just gave it to me. Said, "Here, take it." Because as we know, when under fractional, and they've removed the reserve requirements. I don't know if y'all know this, but apparently the reserve requirements have been completely removed. But um, meaning apparently the bank in the past had to already have a certain amount of money to just create money out of nothing. And how many years now have the so-called truthers been hearing about the printing press and the idea of just poof money being created out of thin air, out of nothing. Um, so yeah, the system was happy to give a 18-year-old Benton uh, all of these lines of credit so that he could go get him a more or less a free home theater system, right? And then I'm supposed to buy into a system to where I was able to charge up when I was 18 like 6,000 what $6,000 in 1995 money, and then uh never paid a dime, and then after 7 years it just went away like it never happened, like it never fucking happened. I mean, how is that even real? It's not. Again, now we're back to the waking dream, surrealistic unreality aspects. It's deja vu all over again, right? But then the traditional family values, MAGA view of that, the so-called conservative view is, oh well, it's a moral imperative to pay your debts. Well, no, it's not. Not if I watch what rich people do. Rich people don't combine morality and paying their debts. Are you crazy? Corporations certainly don't. A corporation, there's absolutely no involvement with morality when it comes to paying for debt. And this is where we see this. I'll bring it back to the Dave Ramsey stuff, and this is why this is the value. If anybody actually, and again, it's such a small crowd, and the views on my channel are so low, and that doesn't bother me too much. But is the value there? But here's the value of my $18 or whatever it is a month for YouTube Premium, and I've actually paid for a whole year of it, so I'm just now back to the month to month. But the value is that I get to walk around and listen to like Dave Ramsey or whatever, and so Dave Ramsey is always portraying himself and his family and all of this as in his business as moral, right? And this idea that, well, yeah. So Dave actually uses Christianity to in some ways pass himself off as not a rich fat cat, because he's like, oh, I tell my family that this isn't our money. So if Dave Ramsey's net worth is, I don't know what it is, let's call it $250 million. It's probably way more than that. He was probably born into a family that had more money than that. But let's say Dave Ramsey's worth 250 million, quarter of a bill. Then so what his approach is, oh, that's not his money, that's God's money. This guy really says this, and oh, we the Ramsey family just manages it. This is what this guy says. Well, so then a recent caller to his show is this guy that has been running his remodeling, his home remodeling business as a Ponzi scheme, because what this guy's been doing is he's been selling projects. So he sells like a $50,000 project, and he gets 25,000 up front. But because this guy is more of a remodeler than a businessman, well, he's gotten into a cash flow crisis where he's been funding the day-to-day operations through taking in of these deposits, and it turns out that the jobs have been getting larger and larger, so much so that he's taken out. He recently got his biggest job ever, 250,000. So he got 125 in cash, but he's blew that just operating the business. So he's explaining to Dave, and this is really what Dave's actually good at, is when a business is in a morass, right? A morass. So they start going through the actual details of the business, and uh, so Dave is very quickly like, it's basically like somebody ain't getting paid, right? Who's more or less like, okay, business fellow, your only chance to not go into bankruptcy here or not to go insolvent is, and now it's not said though, it's implied, right? This is Benton reading between the lines. Basically, what Dave is saying is somebody ain't getting paid, right? And then, so what you're going to do is you're going to go out and sell like 2-week jobs, and you're going to have your crews bust out as many of these 2-week jobs as possible, and then you're going to scramble to actually complete as many of the smaller jobs as you can. And then it turns out that Dave Ramsey has absolutely no moral problems with they're just going to fuck over the person who wrote the check for $125,000. And in fact, this guy's probably already out of business without the 125,000. So the people, now, they didn't understand that they were bailing this guy's business out, right? But the so the morality immediately goes by the wayside. There's no moral imperative to pay these people back, right? It's like, and Dave even acknowledges how angry they're going to be, right? Because they're just getting hosed. If their project is ever even completed, it's certainly not ever going to be completed on time. Most likely, they're going to end up suing over it, probably, right? And or maybe just accepting some kind of settlement through arbitration or whatever. But there's no morality there. It's just like, hey, whatever has to be done to save the business. But this is the same person, Dave Ramsey, who the moment it suits him will cite morals and Jesus and church and God and country and family and all of this. Right. And there is no morality in business. This whole Christian notion of business and prosperity, that's a non fucking starter. And again, I'm back to the idea that the core central tenet of the teachings of Jesus from the Bible is involved in anti-business, anti-establishment, anti-government. It's basically against the established order. And now it is kind of buried in there. And again, the man, the Lord was, in the history, right? We can debate the historicity. And that's the point I was trying to make on the last stream. Again, I end up saying things where later on now I'm like, well, wait a minute, am I offending Jesus here? Right. Uh, you know, but then I don't know that Jesus would take offense, right? So that's probably something in my own head where if I'm, feeling some type of way about my statements. But, I do need to be clear about these things. But they did execute him for sedition, and sedition being speaking out against the government. Like that's the quickest way, speaking out against the established order. Um, so it doesn't actually, at this point, I don't believe it to be possible to follow the teachings of Christ and engage in the business of this world. I believe them to be mutually exclusive. And in fact, just the Christian notion of man cannot serve two masters, just that principle would preclude the individual from engaging in employment, tax paying, business, right, and all of these things. And I understand the knee jerk reaction of, you know, the horror if I even suggest that somebody not engage in employment as a moral imperative, the immediate panic stricken, well, how are we going to feed our families? It's a valid point, and it goes back to a point another content creator made, which is humanity. And let's just talk about Americans, America allowing, and I'll say our because I am an American by definition. Americans allowing our country to be taken over by corporate interests, meaning, well, to feed ourselves for most people. Again, let's exclude the people who grow some of their own food and all. Yeah, that's great. I'm happy. It's wonderful. But can we recognize that the vast majority of everybody is not growing even much food at all, if any? So almost all Americans have allowed over time a system to, so whatever system used to be involved in feeding America, that's now been replaced by agribusiness or whatever we want to call that, large corporate interests. So Americans now find themselves in a situation where, yeah, I understand in the short run, how is a person going to feed themselves? But then if it's a moral imperative, if the system has convinced Christians and Christianity and churchgoers that it's a moral imperative to pay their debts, right? But I can't then just say, well, my morals dictate that based on my understanding of these teachings that um, I'm, and I don't even know. I'm not calling my shot here. I'm doing a thought experiment. You know, how can it not be a moral imperative to say I'm not going to engage in this, right? Or maybe I will. Haven't completely made my mind up. At this point, I'm thinking maybe it'll just be like off the books type shit. But who knows? I don't fucking know. That's part of the fun is the not knowing ahead of time how this thing's going to unfold. I need some kind of reason to be here, right? I need some sort of intrigue on a daily basis, not a daily basis, but some sort of, ongoing intrigue, perhaps. And I know this is a bit of a muddy point I'm making, but I believe the listener is able to follow along. You know, so and how much of so now I'm seeing this idea of common sense or conventional wisdom or the, what I call the word of mouthing of everything. And I'm now realizing that most of what people take for granted or again conventional wisdom, most of it's just flat wrong. I mean, it really is. It's just wrong. So this idea of a moral imperative to repay one's debts, and that's what Dave Ramsey perpetrates. He perpetuates that idea on his main podcast, which is, helping people, pay off their debts and then live the rest of their lives debt free. He has another channel, Entree Leadership, where he helps people who have businesses. So that's where we see that Dave Ramsey, the moral man, when he's talking, this was the same human being. When he's talking to, Joe Schmo, Joe Sixpack or whoever, it's a moral imperative to repay debt. And even Caleb Hammer comes at it to some extent. The paying of debt is a moral imperative. Oh, well, you owe the money, you're supposed to pay it. But then when we take it to the business or the corporate side, look at how quickly Dave Ramsey's like, the moment it's in the best interest of the business itself not to pay its debts, it's neither here nor there. It's just like, yeah, that's the proper strategy for the business, is to not pay some of this debt. So how can it be both things? And I've talked about recently that here's how you know it's a principle, right? If the circumstances change and the principle remains the same, that's a principle. If the circumstances change and the thing that we believed was a principle, if it also changes, well, guess what? That's not a principle. So Dave Ramsey proves that he does not subscribe to uh, paying back of debt as a moral principle. That's not his belief, meaning that's not what he acts on. So that's in fact not a part of his code as a man, is the paying back of debts. Yes, Dave Ramsey will pay his debts when it suits him, or he will advise um, someone in business to either pay or not pay their debts selectively in the best interest of that person or that business. See, but for us folks, us commoners, us chumps, those of us who are wet behind the ears, from the perspective of these fat cats and the people at the top of society, so called. Oh no, we need to be good, righteous, moral people and pay our debts, right? No matter what, you know. But the same fat cats, the same Dave Ramsey types, right? The moment it suits them in their businesses, oh no, uh, we could just screw them over. Just it's basically, and then so part of this was, so this guy owes $125,000 to just these people who own a home somewhere, right? Again, poor folks temporarily, uh, you know, um, temporarily experiencing relative affluence enough so that they can, write this guy a check, that they even need a 250, that they're able to have a home worth enough money to spend $250,000 to remodel. So these are people of they have resources. But then it turns out that he owes the vendor like $50,000, right? So part of the reason to try to work things out with the vendor is it's only based on being able to buy more products, because he has to buy supplies from somebody, right? So the vendor is more apt to get paid back, even though the vendor's a business and the vendor potentially could be better equipped to weather the not getting paid the 50 grand versus the homeowner. We have no idea what them not getting their $125,000 is going to do. Like, there's no way to know. What if that's a flip? I mean, who the fuck knows what that is, right? But fuck them, you know. Fuck them, right? That's this world, right? That's this vacuous, delusory, adversarial, right? That's an adversarial situation, adversarial realm of business transactions. That's what this is, folks. And it's never not that. Now, do other things occur within this realm? Yeah, they do, but it's all within the context of empty, right? Void. That's what vacuous means. Delusory, right? We can get into that definition. Um, Adversarial realm of business transactions, you know. So when I frame it properly, and especially backed by the full faith and credit of what I am, right? What I'm one with, okay, which resolves, you know, at least in the short run, access to that what I refer to as a technology of true knowledge of self. It at least I'm able to resolve within myself, mind, body, and spirit, whatever. And now this is back to the spiritual side. I'm able to resolve enough of this within myself to get through the motherfucking day in a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, which brings us to the spiritual side of things, which I'm really seeing more and more as a cope for this realm. However, right, what greater tool, what greater gift to give to oneself than to level up one's own spiritual abilities to be able to get through the day without having to go on psych meds, without having to go see psychiatrists, right? Without, or as a lot of people do, just plowing their way through the stress and the anxiety and the fear and the depression, right? And then, as we know, it seems to be the people taking themselves out is perhaps at an all-time high. And who knows? Uh, I guess I've only ever really known one person that did that in my whole life, so I don't know about the taking it oneself out, but so in everything I'm speaking on here, this is a complete and total, as far as I'm concerned, this is a complete nullification and invalidation of all of the notions, almost not all, because you know, look, even Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and leftist radicals, they have some points. So it doesn't invalidate all the points of the so-called right, the traditional family values Christians and all of this. But I would say it actually nullifies and invalidates most of their worldview, right? It really does. Because it's this notion of, because again, in a thought experiment, yeah, okay, get rid of all the forces that MAGA believes opposes them, and what is America left with, right? The Republicans and the Republican notion of all of these things. Meanwhile, politics is still only answerable to power and money. The government only does what power and money makes it do, right? So at a certain point, again, political motivation, it's a completely negative motivation. It's a, how do we get how do we get a portion of the populace to support the color red and the Republicans? Well, it's by having an opposing group with the color blue who are called Democrats, and to make sure that that group has these attributes that the red team is sure to despise so thoroughly that they will want to put their energy, their focus, and their efforts into not supporting red and Republican, but into rebuking and defeating and mocking and ridiculing the blue and the Democrat. That's the motivation. So, in fact, Republicans are dependent upon Democrats and vice versa. It works the same. It's just that we have effectively no people who would, again, gun to my head. I hate to break it to you folks. I'm not choosing either one, but gun to my head, it's never Republican. Never. I mean, never. But again, I'm not picking one of the two. Even gun to the head, I'm probably like, well, shit, I've been trying to get up out of here anyway. But so in a thought experiment where I could even be forced to pick one of the two, again, it's a negative motivation. My motivation is the same as everybody else's. Well, there's two sides that I can never, under any circumstances, go with this one of the two sides. Therefore, I'm left with only one alternative. Again, in a thought experiment. And people say, well, how could you ever? And I'm like, well, how could you ever support Republicans? I was like, I don't see, it doesn't logically doesn't work. You can't say, well, how could you ever support what the one color is doing? And I'm like, how could you ever support what the other color is doing? It's like, yeah, I'm not foolish enough to choose to support either one of these sides. What I'm saying is the same argument that's going to be levied at me. It's the same thing I'm going to say to them. Well, how can you support this? Right? Dick Cheney, out of his own mouth, the Republican Dick Cheney said deficits don't matter. I can't support that. Are you crazy? Right? What? This is, George W. Bush, mission accomplished, and, standing there in his flight suit with the codpiece and all of that, or whatever that was, no, no, absolutely not. Invading Afghanistan to make sure that after the Taliban wiped out the opium crop one year, and the U.S. military shows up just in time to make sure that the next crop gets planted. No, of course I'm not. Are you crazy? Right? But I understand that to then say, well, just as long as the Democrats could beat the Republicans, everything's going to be fine. That's insane. That's insane. And then, something I've known for a long time, that most of these so-called truthers are low key Trumpers, right? At least half are low key. Well, but with Trump back in office, so what was interesting to me was I detected it when I first came into the so-called truth community. I detected, well, I said, man, there's a lot of closeted fucking Trump fans here. Like, what's going on? And by extension, Republicans. And it seems like the 4 years of Biden was so fucking torturous. And then the prospect of Kamala, then it's like, okay, now these people are just full on Trumpers. Right. And, I should have gone with my gut back then and been like, yeah, these are people who are, they haven't unbrainwashed themselves. A lot of these content creators. And, I even allowed myself to get sort of ridiculed out of being so in love with the 24-hour news cycle. I was a bit of a Davy Crocco to some extent myself, a lesser version, if anybody gets that reference. But I certainly, and it was a good thing for me as an individual, I was too closely identified with the realness of the news cycle, the political cycle, the economy. I was taking it a little too seriously. It was a little too real to me. So now I see the main person who assisted me, and I'm going to keep this cryptic, because there's really nothing wrong in these behaviors. And again, show me a human, I'll show you a hypocrite. Yeah, that includes me also, but it's kind of a thing to see this person who and I did have and I still do have a lot of regard for this person. And when I have a lot of regard for someone, I do tend to give a little more weight to their viewpoint. And uh so I did back off of some of that, but it did turn out to be good for me in the long run, I have to say. But now I see that person is now seemingly very involved in those same things, the political system, the economy, the 24-hour news cycle, although probably not to the extent I was. Um, yeah, that's been very interesting to see. And then like the Alex Jones stuff, I was a huge Alex Jones show listener right up until he began to carry the water for Trump. And then I stopped listening. As soon as the person who told me all about the left right paradigm, and people I think have forgotten how anti Republican in particular Alex Jones was. And yes, he did not like the Democrats, but his criticisms were even stronger against the Republicans because that's supposed to be the party of conservatism. Right. And Alex Jones, the human being, would have been conservative, at least in some ways. Right. And so my thing is, where are the people who are somewhat conservative who are also strongly critical of the Republican Party? See, that's supposed to be what America's about. America historically has been sold as this notion of, you know, the system's going to operate through sort of everybody has their say, constitutional republic, the political party in order to get in power is going to have to in some ways do the will of the people. Well, that's all gone. None of that exists anymore. There is no such thing as the will of the people as far as America. That's not a thing. It's just simply not a thing. And well, let me finish the point about Alex Jones real quick. And so Alex Jones lost me as a person who was very, very engaged in his content. Well, there's another person who, and this is not I'm going to take my ball and go home. This is I'm observing what's happened. There's another, a YouTube content creator that I'm no longer engaged with their content solely based on the Trump stuff. Same thing with Alex Jones. As soon as it was apparent that he was going to make excuses and assist Trump, it's like, well, I can't listen to this. I can't listen to somebody who's on Team Trump. This is crazy, right? Well, same with this content creator. And now they might claim not to be on Team Trump, but yeah, it's okay. Sure. Good luck with that one. Good luck convincing anybody of that. And also, nothing wrong with it. If somebody wants to be a Trump supporter, that's also fine. It's just, there's not going to be much for me to engage with there, which is, again, it's all fine, right? Um, it's all not a problem. And, even as I watch the YouTube numbers go down, because I'm now what? Criticizing the thing that's viewed as good and righteous, the Republicans. But why are they viewed as good and righteous? They're only viewed as good and righteous because there's a seemingly opposing group called Democrats of the blue color, and that's the scapegoat. All criticisms, all everything bad is directed at them. Well, that doesn't then confer positive qualities onto the color red and the Republican Party. See, that's where you lose me is that, oh, yes, Democrats are horrible. Absolutely. That doesn't make the what is passed off as the opposition, that doesn't then make them good and wholesome, right? And then it's also to prove oneself to be a chump and say, well, okay, the Democrats are horrible. That's never an option. And the Republicans, they out of their mouths espouse the rhetoric that I like to hear, right? Well, what good is that if the actions don't match the words? Like, how is that a benefit? If the actions don't meet the words, if Republicans don't have to ever actually take the actions that match the rhetoric, and if the followers and supporters are so brainwashed that no matter what happens, it's another win for the toe. If anybody gets that reference, Steel Toe Morning Show, and in these lol cows, more or less, no matter what happens, it's another win for the toe, even if it's objectively bad. Same thing with people who align with a political party. Same thing. Same thing with Democrats. I watch Democrats who are at least have the good sense not to just fall in love with their dear leader for whatever reason, but you know, it's the same thing over there. Um, it's just the Republicans are even worse about it. It's just that their people, these are our people. Whatever they do is good and righteous. It does become a worship of a religion at a certain point. Like what could ever be done in the name of Republicans and Donald Trump to where actual Republicans, and I shouldn't even say actual Republicans, just common folks who think they're Republicans would be like, okay, hold on a minute. That, sir, is too far. That, sir, would be too bold. And it's really, when will the people check the power? It's never going to happen. So what I'm seeing is the people who support that party will never check the power that party represents. Meaning, there's nothing Republicans can do. There's nothing Donald Trump can do to have people say, "Well, no, that's too far. We're not supporting that," because it'll always get funneled through what the Democrats would do and how evil that would be, if that makes sense. So the fact that there's always an other to blame, why can't people figure out the psychological trap of, well, as long as the other is always there to mock, ridicule, and blame everything on, that's a mechanism that actually provides absolution to the other side. The Republicans are now absolved of any and all wrongdoing solely based on there's a scapegoat in the other direction that can always be blamed, right? Almost like, well, I don't want to get into that. I don't know enough about it to speak about it, but I had a thought that may or may not be correct. And hopefully you understand the point I'm making. And then now we get into introspection and we get into critique and criticism of oneself, right? And then we get into an internalization versus an externalization, which is, yeah, criticize and critique externally, and the external in this case is the Democratic Party, but don't criticize and critique internally. And then in this example, internally would also include the Republican Party. No, don't criticize and critique there, because remember, we've got the scapegoat on the other side. Direct all critique and criticisms that way, thus absolving the Republican Party of any and all wrongdoing. Like, again, the conventional wisdom, the word of mouthing of everything, so called common sense. How am I able to figure this out and other people aren't? Right. Well, they probably just don't want to. It's not in their best interest. They're trying to get through the day. They're trying to what? They're trying to feed their families in a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. So, again, back to my own framework spiritually for seeing all of these things, right? Spiritually, it makes a lot of sense, right? Now, I don't respect it. It's quite the opposite. Uh, you know, I don't, that's not respectable to behave that way. However, it doesn't reflect on me. Um, and so if I ask myself, okay, well, why does Benton care? Well, I really don't, except I see the potential. I think that's what bothers me. I see the potential that people would, do a little better, that they would, if they tried, that many folks would be able to grow and change and evolve. And these are everything I'm speaking on here. It's a limitation or limitations that you know that I allow myself to become annoyed and frustrated at times, because I see that if other people were willing and able and put out the effort, well, that they would be able, a lot of these folks, and that they're simply unwilling to. And I understand why, and a lot of the reasons why they're unwilling is because of uh, what this realm is doing to them. And then recognizing the fact is, I have way more courage than most people. That's just a fact. So what this boils down to in Benton's world is most people are cowards, full stop. And to even advance and grow and change to the point of being able to even comprehend and understand what I'm saying is, in fact, that's a threat to their ability to get through the day and their ability to do what they're going to do anyway. So the thing is, if they're going to continue to punch a clock, they're going to continue to support the system, they're going to continue to behave in ways that perpetuate and reinforce the system. And while believing to, hold certain, more or less to believe that they follow a religion that's rooted in the teachings of Jesus, and that, I'm almost certain at this point that the central theme of Jesus's teachings was against employment and paying taxes and all of this. Oh, but see it, in order to get through the day, a Christian can always just say render unto Caesar. It's like, well, that's not what that means, but you know, I can explain it till I'm blue in the face. They're not willing to hear it. Just in their world, they're told by the book to pay their taxes, and that's what they're going to do. And then so, me being able to, understand and comprehend and intellectualize a lot of these things, I'm sort of the odd man out in a lot of ways. Might have picked up a IRL listener here. Not sure. Anyway, it's distracting me a tad. It's probably a good place to see how long we've been yakking. Did one of you text me, or is this just a random phishing attempt? What's this area code? Probably a wrong number. I don't think really hard. A few people, I guess, have my number. Not very many. It's just like two people, I think, actually. Well, and let's say this is true. See, Chucky says Dave Ramsey went bankrupt in his mid 20s. See, what does that mean, though? And see, Chucky's actually going to make my point here. What do you mean, Dave Ramsey? See, Dave Ramsey was born into wealth. Right. Now, if all of that wealth is held in trust, right? And Dave Ramsey talks about that all his stuff is held in trust, his stuff and whatever he's given to his family, whatever he's passing on for his family to, uh, tend to God's money and resources, from Dave's perspective. So this idea that, let's just say Dave Ramsey, the individual person, Dave Ramsey, went bankrupt on paper, right? That has nothing to do with what Dave Ramsey would have had access to through his family trust that existed before he was born. Do you see the difference? So now a person who claims to be a God-fearing Christian, Dave Ramsey, he's able to go onto his podcast and talk about how he speculated in real estate in his 20s and he mismanaged it and went broke and then apparently learned from that. But that's not the case because he doesn't tell you, but however, I still had access to my family resources so much so that even if Dave Ramsey, the human being, the legal person, was bankrupt on paper, that meant nothing. Right. Now, especially if Dave Ramsey would have understood, and that's also used as an excuse for why he's so against debt. Right. That's also one of the reasons why he would supposedly, because there would need to be some kind of reason why he's against debt, just as a concept. So it's interesting to just see the level of gamesmanship, and also uh, just the lies, right? Because what the lie there is to imply that Dave Ramsey had $0, because that's what most people think that means. Bankruptcy means $0. No, it doesn't. It can't mean $0. No, it doesn't. That's not what bankrupt doesn't. Now, I'm sure somewhere in the dictionary. I mean, I'm talking about what's legally and financially considered bankruptcy. That doesn't mean $0, which is also fascinating. So there's never been a moment in Dave Ramsey's life where he did not have access to fabulous wealth. So if you want to call that bankrupt in your 20s, that's fine. Part of that is probably, I don't know what his parents were like, but he was afforded the opportunity to sort of choose his path in life, and that was what he chose to do. And that would have been viewed by rich people as sort of, just an expectation of failure, right? Like it's kind of a normal part of the learning process is the individual, there's some measure of failure initially, right? So we can see how an unexamined concept such as Dave Ramsey went bankrupt in his mid 20s. Well, I can use reasoning, I can use logic reasoning, deductive reasoning, right? Put on my detective hat, you know, do my Sherlock Holmes bit, and then combine with the knowledge I have, I can paint a very different picture than the one that people will assume about Dave Ramsey. See? So yeah, let's say he did go bankrupt in his 20s. That doesn't mean what you think it means, right? Dave Ramsey was born into such wealth that he can never not be wealthy. If that makes sense. He's protected from himself. from ever becoming unwealthy. Yeah, it's fascinating. He was Dave Ramsey was not born into some version of what I was born into, which is, oh look, I'm born into this family, and by the time I have any concept of what this world is, and as far as the official fiction layers of this place, oh look, well my father, you know, is comparatively rich compared to, my peers' parents, right? Well, my dad was never rich. He was never wealthy. Dave Ramsey was born into a family that's probably been wealthy for a long fucking time, and that's okay. But this idea that he is what he is now because he learned from his falling on his face in his 20s, that's him telling what he knows to be lies. He knows he's lying when he says all of that, right? He knows he's lying when he heavily implies that, or just outright states that paying back one's debts is a moral imperative. He knows he's lying. Doesn't matter. He's free to lie. Of course he is. And then, of course, the other side of the Dave Ramsey bankruptcy psyop is some people will just say that to say, well, what, how much could he possibly know? Look at what happened to him. But then you got the present success also, So yeah, it's interesting to think about, certainly. Well, I don't want to chew up too much more of my monthly 20 hours, so I'm going to get out of here. Thanks for watching. Bye.